All right, so I want to take a few moments to talk about the split brain studies and how they relate to alien abduction and demonic possession. So, before I begin the split brain studies, let's go back to the 1800s where there was a case of this railroad worker who was injured while working. He had a steel rod go through his eye socket and out the back of his head. But he managed to survive, and he was the first person to actually survive traumatic brain injury like this. And after he recovered, he was able to return to work and semi-function, but there was a difference in his personality. He wasn't the same. And what happened was he was not able to regulate his emotions, and he was not able to filter his verbal expressions. So he was getting angrier a lot because he was not able to control that. And he was verbally expressing his anger without any filtering or control mechanisms. And he wasn't able to regulate his emotions and his filtering system. So he changed as a person. And this is when the field of neuroscience realized that, oh, the brain, it might actually have something to do with who you are, because as we can see, when this guy received damage to the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that regulates emotions, he was not able to do that anymore. So later on in the 70s, when Miller and Gazzaniga, these neuroscientists, were trying to find a cure for epilepsy, they realized that when epileptic people have seizures, the reason why they have a seizure is because there's an electrical signal that crosses from the right to the left hemisphere of the brain through a bunch of fibers called the corpus callosum. So their hypothesis was that if you sever those fibers, the electrical signal cannot pass through to the other side and the person won't have a seizure. So they did this experiment and it actually worked. But not only did it work, they actually discovered a whole bunch of other things. So what they also discovered was that everybody has a hidden self or a secret self that you are unaware of, but this secret self actually has a consciousness of itself. And they can demonstrate these findings over and over again in a laboratory. So the way they do this is they get a regular person and they show them, there's a whole bunch of tests that they do, but I'm going to focus on two of them. So one of the tests is they go to a normal person and they hold up two fingers and they say, how many fingers am I holding up in each hand? And they're able to say there's one in each hand. But when they ask the split brain subject, the subject who has had their corpus callosum severed, when they ask them, how many fingers am I holding up? They will also say one in each hand, one on the left, one on the right. But when they ask them to show, so then they show them another number. So they say, how many fingers am I holding up now? And then they'll ask them, and they'll reply the same. And the reason why they'll reply the same, you're holding up one finger in each hand. And the reason why they reply the same, even though they're holding up 5 wiggly fingers in the other hand, is because they had their corpus callosum severed, so they're only processing information through one hemisphere, through one brain hemisphere. And in this case, it was the right side. Because the left side is responsible for verbal expression. So they don't have access to the left side. Everything is directed to the right side. But what's interesting is when they asked the same patient, the one that had the corpus callosum severed, to show how many fingers they were holding up, their body actually held up the correct number. So what does that say? It says that verbally they just were not able to say how the real number of fingers that were held up. But they can show it. But for some reason, it could not be translated. Well, there is a reason. It's because they don't have they're not using the left hemisphere, or all the information is being routed to the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere is still active. That's the whole point. They just couldn't translate the visual signal into a verbal one. And so these findings have actually revealed a lot about people's behavior, because we all assume that we have full agency over ourselves. Because if you sit up or if you're sitting down and you want to stand up, you just stand up. So it feels like I'm in control of my body. I'm in control of all of it. But you got to remember that you are billions of cells that are working together in orbit. And everything has to stay regulated in this orbit for you to be you. And if you receive damage to a certain part of your brain, then it's going to change who you are. So how does this relate to the alien abduction and the demonic possession and hypnosis? So I'll talk about how this relates to hypnosis first, because as you all know, there's lots of people who are hyper suggestible to hypnosis, and it works better on these kinds of people than it does on others. And they're very good at taking direct suggestion or indirect suggestion, and their bodies can actually do things that their conscious mind normally wouldn't under the command of a hypnotist. And so this phenomenon, this hypnotic phenomenon, is related to the fact that we all have an unconscious mind. But not only do we have an unconscious mind, which makes up 88% of our total behavior, and which is all our habits, our tendencies, which we're so susceptible to, and only 12% of our consciousness is our actual agency. That's why most people don't actually live up to their full potential, because if you think about it, anybody could do anything, or could do a lot of things, but most people won't. And it just won't. That's what it is. It's not that they can't, it's that they won't. And part of that reason is not their fault. It actually has to do with gaining control over these parts of us that we're not even aware exist. That we are not even aware of. So, how does this relate to the alien abduction experiences and the demonic possession? Well, first of all, a lot of people, and I would say a lot of Christians, don't see the UFO abductions as UFO abductions. They see them as demonic. And there's good reason for this, because they mirror, if you read the description of demons and how they work, it's pretty much mirrors the same deception and messaging as the UFO abductions, because many of the UFO abductions are traumatic. So they always involve probing and being clamped down and being paralyzed, taken against their will. It's really similar to satanic cults. And also a lot of these alien abductions, UFO abductions, alien abductions, most of them are psychological. So they're like psychedelic experiences, and only a small percentage of them are actually physical, where the people are like, no, I was physically taken. Like, they were not regressed through hypnosis and then recovering memories or nothing like that. Like, they know that they were taken. And so to a lot of people, that just mirrors satanic cult activity, and which these demons or demonic aids and things, they all work by deception. So if you look at the messaging of a lot of these UFO abductees, they always have a message. They don't always have a message, but a lot of them have a message that the aliens gave them to give to the rest of the world. And the message is usually about how Earth has to change before its demise and its destruction. But it usually changes with the times. So sometimes the UFO abductees say that the aliens were from the moon, but then after we went to the moon, they said they're from Venus. Then after they found out that something about Venus, then now they're from planet X or Nibiru or somewhere else, like a totally different star system. So a lot of this messaging that changes with the times is seen as deception by people, where they're being deceived. And so, like, I look at evil in the world, and there's random acts of violence. that can't be explained. And you have all these psychiatrists that they have all these advanced degrees and they study this stuff for years and years, and they don't really have a straight answer other than that we know that their brains look different. But what actually makes what is evil? Like, what are these like hideous acts that people aspire to do? Maybe there's not a scientific explanation for it. So that's where I don't think there is a scientific explanation for evil. I actually think it's real. Like, it's an actual force that exists, just like gravity. So is good. I believe in these forces. So the fact that people have this unconscious part of themselves that has its own sentience and can control your body, because like I said, you go back to those experiments, split brain experiments, where you ask the person, how many fingers am I holding up in my right hand? Verbally they say 1, but you tell them to show how many fingers they're holding up and they will show 5. So their body is being controlled by something else than they're able to express verbally. And so automatic writing is different than channeling. So channeling is when somebody is speaking, is when a being is speaking through a person. Automatic writing is when a person's physical body, in this case their hand, is being guided by an external force. And so there is a lot of extraterrestrial books that have been automatically written, such as In the Days to Come is one book, and the largest book that was written like this, which is 2,000 pages long, is called the Urantia book. And it's a blend of philosophy, religion, and science. And it's about extraterrestrials. It says that Jesus was an extraterrestrial and all these things. But a lot of people point to the Urantia book. Some people point to it as a fraud. Some people point to it as demonic. And some people believe that it's really a message from extraterrestrials. And so I bring all these things up because when we're thinking about our own daily lives and how much agency we really have over our behavior and our actions, it gives you more. The more you know, or the more you can know, the more real estate that you can have agency over, then you can start messing with your reality in a more positive way. Not only by keeping evil forces out, but by preserving the goodness within and continuing as an ascending citizen in the universe. So it's just something to think about.